This morning I'm actually going to be speaking about how God fights the battle. God fights the battle for his children. God appointed Ezekiel to be the national prophet to the exiles in Babylon, and up to this point he has given prophecies and messages just for Israel. The timeline of his history that we will be looking at this morning has had Ezekiel urging the people for the past 7 years to turn from their idolatry. He spoke only God's word, and literally he embodied weird physical actions at the behest of God to startle and provoke the people to pay attention to him. Remember, he was honoured to see the likeness of the glory of God. You would do whatever you were told to do, right? And he did some strange things. But despite all of this, we know the people didn't change, by God's account, because they were firstly hard-hearted, hard-headed, and a rebellious people. Plus, we heard last week, false prophets were among them, giving them conflicting messages. And in their arrogance, they believed that the Lord's unique covenant with them guaranteed that Jerusalem and the temple would remain the Lord's chosen place of his name eternally, and that David and one of his sons would rule on his throne forever. So they couldn't be told, they couldn't imagine God would destroy Jerusalem. Regardless of their idolatry, they truly believed that God's glory would never leave the temple. So God's judgments on Israel were discounted by the people. And that is chapters 1 to 24. Is there an echo? Should I move that a bit? But from chapters 25 to 32, there is a change in tack. God's judgments are not going to be directed to Israel. Instead, Ezekiel is pronouncing judgments to the nations that are geographically surround the land of Israel. These are not God's chosen people. They aren't under any covenant. So why the judgment and why the punishments? And today we will look briefly at 6 of the 7 nations that God has singled out to judge and condemn. These nations, or mini kingdoms that were to the east and south, were not only neighbouring countries. Israel was ethnically related to these people. Ammon and Moab, these are the tribes that are descendants of Abraham's nephew Lot, so they're cousins. Edom are descendants of Esau, who is Jacob's twin brother. So they are brothers, they are family, they all called Abraham their father. So this ring of neighbours are essentially estranged brothers, estranged, hostile brothers who set themselves up against the purpose of the chosen one. They have set themselves up against God's people. Today we'll look at where does this hostility come from? We can trace it back to the hostility of the first 2 brothers, and that takes us all the way back to Cain and Abel. So the answer to where this hostility came from is found in Genesis, in the garden. It's even further back, where a serpent or a snake speaking with an animal, the serpent or the snake speaking with the woman. We know how that worked out. And then God said these words to the snake. Can I have that slide? I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Enmity is the word for enemy or hostility. There will be hostility between you, snake, and the woman. Then there will be hostility between the snake's offspring and the woman's offspring. Other translations say there'll be hostility between the snake's seed and the woman's seed. Seed, offspring, descendants, they all have the same meaning. They all refer to what each will give birth to or to what they will produce. So there will be descendants who will take the role of the snake, and then there will be her descendants. So there's going to be this perpetual hostility between someone that's born for the purposes of God through the woman, and then some people that are born of a snake. Then he, if that's there, her offspring, her descendant will crush your head, snake, and the snake's descendants will strike the woman's descendants. All this hostility has culminated in a he coming to defeat, not the snake's descendants, but to defeat the snake itself. That's important. And hands down, that has to be the best verse in the Bible. So this story of conflict or hostility between the chosen one and the hostile non-chosen is being foreshadowed here with these nations that God is going to judge. Tim Mackey gives this example. When Cain and Abel offered their sacrifices to God, Abel's sacrifice was accepted, Cain's was not. God graciously proposed that Cain offer another appropriate sacrifice. God said to Cain, "Listen, son, there's an animal crouching at your door." Actually, he said this. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." God was saying, this isn't the end game. Cain, offer me another sacrifice. I can favour your second sacrifice. So you have the choice here. If you don't choose to do good, you need to understand there's an animal at your door and it wants you. But you can rule it, you can master it. Because we know that from Genesis 1:28, the humans are called to rule over all the animals, everything that moves, everything that creeps on the earth. So God tells Adam, there are some creatures out there that you're going to have to dominate, to rule. And after God says that, the very next story we read that there's a creeper that comes along, and not only do Adam and Eve not rule it, they end up being ruled by it, by its deception and treachery. So back to Cain, and God says there's an animal crouching at your door and it's called sin. And in Cain's case, it's like a power, an evil force. It's like an animal that wants him. And God said, Cain, I put you here to rule over this beast, but the choice is yours. And what the narrative goes on to tell us is that Cain gives in to the beast, he opens the door to the beast, and Cain murders his brother. The first generational sin, Adam and Eve's story, is placed alongside the Cain and Abel story, and Cain is depicted here as replaying the failure of his parents, but in the place of the deceiving snake, now is this animal, sin, that Cain, like his parents, don't rule over it. So what happens next is that we see Cain is turning from the seed of the offspring of the woman. His choices turn him into the seed of the snake. It's like he lets the snake become his master. And what does that lead to? It led to the murder of the chosen one, the favoured one. So just map through this how this pattern is going to keep working itself out through the scriptures. Another example of hostile brothers is Jacob, the favourite one, and then Esau, the non-favourite one. But it didn't have to end poorly for Esau. And again we see the image of the hostility between the two offsprings, Satan's offspring versus the woman's. So where there is hostility between brothers, hostility among families, hostility between the chosen and the non-chosen, the favoured and the non-favoured. We need to activate this pattern. So back to the judgments. What terrible deeds had these nations committed that would require God's punishment? Was it murder, adultery, injustice, idolatry with child sacrifices? Was it homosexuality? They did commit all these sins and more, but that wasn't why judgment came this day. All the prophecies that were given were in a cause and effect format. Say to them, because you did this to Judah, I will do this to you. It's the principle of causation. Can I have the map up? So let's go to Ezekiel 25. This is what God says to the nation of Ammon. Because you said, ha ha, over my sanctuary when it was desecrated, and over the land of Israel when it was laid waste, and over the people of Judah when they went into exile, and because you clapped your hands and stamped your feet, rejoicing with all the malice of your heart against the land of Israel, therefore I will stretch out my hand against you and give you as plunder to the nations. I will wipe you out from among the nations and exterminate you from the countries. Then say to the nation of Moab, because Moab and Seir said, look, Judah has become like all the other nations. Therefore I will inflict punishment on Moab. To Philistia say, because the Philistines acted in vengeance and took revenge with malice in their hearts and with ancient hostility and sought to destroy Judah, therefore I will carry out great vengeance on them and punish them in all my wrath. To Edom say, because Edom took revenge on Judah, you have become very guilty by doing so. I will take vengeance on Edom by the hand of my people Israel, and they will deal with Edom in accordance with my anger and my wrath. They will know my vengeance. So all these nations had a jolly good laugh at Israel's expense, and by extension they were mocking God. They rejoiced like they had won the lottery. They all displayed a prideful attitude in their rejoicing, that they were manifesting the hostility of the snake. They were all laughing, but not for long, because each prophecy ended with these punishing words. Then they will know I am the sovereign Lord. So Ammon, Moab, Edom, Philistia, Tyre, Sidon, and Egypt find themselves in one big cosmic courtroom where God is both prosecutor and judge. The Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. While I was reading up on this, I stumbled upon something interesting, albeit a bit obscure. It was the prophet Obadiah. Poor old Obadiah, nobody knows who he is. We all know Ezekiel to be the cray-cray, intense guy, but who was Obadiah? I remember Esther, when she was little, she used to have this limerick that she'd say about Obadiah. That's as far as it went. Obadiah came out of nowhere. No dates, no detail, absolutely nothing. He just pronounced a damning prophecy to the people of Edom for their actions against Israel, and then he's never heard of again. He pretty much disappears. His book consists of one chapter, 21 verses long, and it's less than a 3-minute read, but it details their punishment and destruction and Israel's restoration. He points out that Edom's charge for their violence was against their own brother, Jacob. Remember, as I said, they were descendants of Esau, who was Jacob's twin. You remember Esau, he was the hairy one, the one that was famished. He couldn't wait to get his hands on a bowl of red lentils. So what provoked Obadiah to give this judgment, and it's all in this verse. He said, "Because of the violence you did to your close relatives in Israel, you will be filled with shame and destroyed forever. When they were invaded, you stood aloof, refusing to help them. Foreign invaders carried off their wealth and cast lots to divide up Jerusalem, but you acted like one of Israel's enemies. You should not have done that. You should not have gloated when they exiled your relatives to distant lands. You should not have rejoiced when the people of Judah suffered such misfortune. You should not have spoken arrogantly in that terrible time of trouble. You should not have plundered the land of Israel when they were suffering such calamity. You should not have gloated over their destruction when they were suffering such calamity. You should not have seized their wealth when they were suffering such calamity. You should not have stood at the crossroads, killing those who tried to escape. You should not have captured the survivors and handed them over in their terrible time of trouble." And verse 3 tells us why they did it. It was the pride of your heart that has deceived you. They couldn't contain their joy, so much so that without being asked, they decided to pitch in and help Babylon destroy Israel, Judah. You should not have done those things. They should have remembered that blood was thicker than water. But it was the hostility in their hearts towards their brothers, and we now see how the snake's seed has spread through them without constraint. Jesus said, "You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him." That's John 8:44. So Ezekiel's 4 short prophecies against the nations are followed by 2 long prophecies against Tyre and Egypt. These 2 nations get particularly targeted, and this morning I'm going to concentrate on the prophecy against Tyre. Actually, Tyre and Sidon are both connected, appearing to render them equally notorious for their wickedness and idolatry. So we always say Tyre when we speak about Sidon as well. So from history we know that Tyre and Sidon were the 2 most powerful Phoenician commercial states of their time. They're known for their naval strength and merchant fleets. They established trades across the Mediterranean, reaching across to North Africa, as far north to Spain, and even to Britain. Can we have that picture? They also are known for purple dye production. They are famous, especially famous for producing the Tyrian purple, a highly prized and super expensive dye made from the murex snail, sea snail. This dye was so valuable that it became the symbol of royalty and imperial power in the ancient world. In Rome, only the emperor could wear purple clothes, and it was called royal purple or imperial purple. They produced so much of this dye that they dyed the awnings on their buildings royal purple. They had skilled tradesmen like glassmakers, metalworkers, textilers. Their artisans were highly sought after and their goods were traded widely. And where you have a lot of economic traffic, you have loads of money. There was opulent wealth in those 2 coastal cities. They were like the original New York, London, Milan, Paris type of city rolled into one. Their religious practices and deities influenced neighbouring cultures, including the Greeks and the Romans. So in the Phoenician settlements of Sicily, for example, there is evidence of child sacrifice, the abomination which the biblical prophets railed against. And finally, Tyre was famous for being unassailable, was never conquered. Because of her wealth, she had heavily secured and fortified herself. And another reason was that part of Tyre was an island that was just a kilometre or so away from the mainland, and they built that up into a mighty fortress as well. And this is what the prophet Zechariah says about Tyre. I found this really an interesting thing. Tyre had built herself a stronghold. She has heaped up silver like dust and gold in like the dirt of the streets. I'd say this is where the phrase filthy rich comes from. That's how much money they had. Let's go on to the next chapter, chapter 26. The word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, because Tyre has said of Jerusalem, ha ha, the gates to the nations is broken, and its doors have flung open to me. Now she lies in ruins, I will prosper. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Tyre, and I will bring many nations against you. Like the sea casting up its waves, they will destroy the walls of Tyre and pull down her towers. I will scrape away her rubble and make her a bare rock. Tyre rejoiced that Jerusalem's demise would open up endless opportunities to her. Already the most powerful, the most wealthy nation in the known world wanted more. Ezekiel goes on to say, the city will be ravaged by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who will attack with a massive army, demolishing its walls and buildings. Its wealth will be plundered and its people will be killed by the sword. The prophecy states that Tyre's stones, timber and rubble would be thrown into the sea. Even the rubble would be turned into rubble. And the city would become a bare rock, a place for spreading fish nets. The city will never be rebuilt. And then Ezekiel's told to prepare a dirge, a death song for Tyre. The city is now compared to a magnificent ship built with the finest materials, made by skilled craftsmen and manned by sailors from all over the world. Then Ezekiel goes on to describe Tyre's sudden and violent destruction. The city, likened like this beautiful ship, is wrecked by a mighty eastern gale in the heart of the seas. All its wealth, crew and warriors are lost in the depths. Say to Tyre, situated at the gateway to the seas, merchant of peoples on many coasts, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You say, Tyre, I am perfect in beauty. Tyre saw herself perfect. Indeed, she was a city renowned for her beauty. Her builders had created a truly magnificent city, as I said, from materials all over the world. But her pride made her extremely ugly to God. In her insatiable greed for wealth and power, that made her rejoice when she heard of Jerusalem's destruction, that all the commercial wealth that previously was produced by Jerusalem would now come to Tyre. The first principle we know about God is that he opposes the proud. Throughout the Bible, we see the prideful are brought down. Both nations and individuals are humbled. God opposes prideful people because it decenters him as the one who should be central, and he is replaced with ourselves. We get an inflated sense of self-importance, which results in rebellion against God and disregard for others. Pride as sin has been defined as the mother of all sins. It is believed to be the source from which other vices and immoral behaviours start. Eve followed her pride Eve allowed her pride to creep into her heart to be like God. Her pride led her to disobedience. Cain was too prideful to offer a different sacrifice to the Lord. His pride led to murder. Nimrod built the Tower of Babel, a monument to their own greatness and power. His pride led to defiance. Did he build a tower as a safeguard against the future judgment, so that in the event of another flood, he could run up the tower to save himself? In his pride, the wicked man does not seek God. In all his thoughts, there is no room for God. Pride is an attitude of independence from God. It is synonymous in the scripture with scoffing, foolishness, evil, and wickedness. So Tyre as a nation, perfect in beauty, has come to an end of its dominance and splendour. But God is not done with the judgments. In chapter 28, we will find out that God also has a prophecy for the prince of Tyre, the ruler of this great kingdom. It goes on to give a lament for the king of Tyre, who is also known as the rulers, the authorities, the power of this dark world, and the evil forces in the heavenly realms. What's God doing in his cosmic courtroom? He's judging the prideful, the mockers, and the gloaters. You see, nothing goes unseen by God. And we see this in the aha that caught God's attention. You might think that crime doesn't fit the punishment, but those ahas were loaded. And then God condemns them for the general wrongdoing, such as the oppression and the corruption, greed, and the lust for violence that they had as well. In doing so, he demonstrates to these nations that he is the sovereign God. Yes, he allows Israel to be taken into captivity to humble her, and then he will bring her back out of captivity. He reveals himself and opens blind eyes so that they can see his glory, and he dishes out as he dishes out punishment on the wicked nations around them. He sends prophets to Israel to warn the people of their impending destruction if they don't repent. So God tells Israel to listen to these prophets because their liberation, their salvation is just ahead. And this occurs on a loop. Throughout their history, God is repositioning his original plan with Adam. Not a new plan, but the same plan that he set out with him in the garden. Adam stuffed up that plan, but God repositioned it with a covenant he made with Abram, where he promises to make Abram the father of a great nation, and he would give them a home called the Promised Land. At Mount Sinai, through Moses, God revisits that covenant that he made with Abraham, and he takes them into the Promised Land to make them into a holy kingdom that will spread his blessings and glory to all the nations. Despite these covenants, Israel bowed their knees to idols. They followed the customs of nations around them, and they demanded to be given a king to rule over them. God chose David to be their king, and God makes a covenant with David, promising to make his name great and to raise up a descendant from his line who would sit on the throne forever. But there was a caveat. There was an ironclad condition. David and his descendants must remain faithful to God, following the covenantal laws. David built Jerusalem, and Solomon built the temple, and God's glory entered the temple and resided there in the holies of holies. After Solomon died, his kingdom was divided into north and southern kingdoms. Only a few kings followed in the footsteps of David. The rest, at best, were mediocre and the children of God fell into full-blown pagan idolatry. They had a national relationship with God in name only, and God sent prophet after prophet to warn them that that wasn't enough, but they didn't listen. But we know that didn't happen in this case. So God allowed Babylon to capture Judah and take the exiles physically back to the original place that was located in Mesopotamia, the country of the rivers. The place where God had created humans in his image had now become a corrupt place where man made gods in their own image. So the land where God had made man in his image had now become the place where man made God in their own image. God allows them to go back. He takes them back to the land of the Ur of Chaldeans, which is in that whole area of the Mesopotamia. They are taken back to the land of their forefather Abraham. It was this country out of which Abraham had been called out of, and the exile are returned precisely to the place out of which they had been chosen, and it all represented the undoing of their chosenness. But there's hope, because God says these words in 2 Chronicles. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evil ways, I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. This little word if is a subordinating conjunction that introduces a conditional clause. If sets up the conditions, or if acts as the trigger for the rest of the sentence. This is the classic example of, again, cause and effect relationship. This has to be the universal verse for the church today. Maverick's song, Heal Our Land, is that song for the church today. Heal our land. For generations, Israel ignored the term of their covenant with Yahweh, breaking commandments and living by their own definitions of good and evil. Amidst rebellion and exile, the prophet spoke of a new covenant, saying God will one day fulfill all of his promises, repairing and restoring his relationship with his people and blessing all the nations through them. He was clearing the way for a renewed Israel, a new kingdom, a new temple. But first, he would bring down every self-deification that all the nations and Israel had come to worship. And that's what God was doing here, cleaning out, purifying the old ways of living, and for 70 years they would remain as captives to the Babylonians. So in the end, what does history tell us about this incredible city, Tyre? Well, straight after Nebuchadnezzar was done destroying Jerusalem, he moved his army north to Tyre in 585 BC, and he besieged the city for 13 years till all the settlements on the mainland were destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar destroyed mainland Tyre, but not the island stronghold. So that's the stronghold there. That's the island. So it seems that Ezekiel's prophecy doesn't completely come true. The Trians were now safe on their island and happily continued their way of life. Tyre became the unconquerable kingdom. All their power and position, their wealth, proved too much for any invaders. They had certainly built themselves up to be the strongest and most powerful empire during that time. Well, not empire, but country. 250 years pass, and now it is the year 336 BC. Philip II, king of Macedonia, was assassinated, and his young son, only 20 at the time, became king. He quickly consolidated power and embarked on a massive military campaign. After securing control of Greece and the Balkans, he continued on his conquest of the mighty Persian Empire, who he thought had become a threat. The Battle of Granicus River in 334 BC was his first major victory against the Persian forces in Asia Minor, which opened up the path for his army to advance. That same year, there was the siege of Halicarnassus, where he laid siege to the heavily fortified city and the Persian naval base, and ultimately capturing it. A year later, at the Battle of Issus, his forces directly confronted and defeated the main Persian army led by the mighty King Darius III. This victory gave him control of Syria and the Levant, paving the way for the siege of Tyre. He was approximately 1,500 kilometres away from home at the tender age of 24. This siege proved very challenging. The siege, which had begun in 332 BC, lasted for 7 months. The city, situated on an island on the coast, was impregnable due to its strong high walls and powerful navy. This Macedon army obviously didn't have a navy. They had come all the way inland, conquering as they were coming down. So this young leader had the idea to create a path to the city by constructing a causeway from the mainland. That was audacious thinking. He ordered his men to throw into the sea every stone, rubble, piece of timber that was in the old abandoned city, Tyre. They began building the causeway across the shallow water. The city was scraped down to just rock, and everything was thrown into the sea. They built a causeway from Tyre's mainland to the island fortress, using the millions of cubic feet of rubble left over on mainland Tyre. As the causeway neared the island, the water became deeper. The Tyrians, from their high walls, could launch attacks on the causeway, and the builders were being hit by these projectiles, and this slowed down the effort, but it didn't stop them. It didn't stop him. Eventually, this young soldier decided that he would acquire a naval fleet from allied cities, which allowed him to blockade the island and also attack from the sea. And after the causeway was completed and a weak point was found in the city walls, he launched a coordinated attack from both the sea and the land. The Macedonians breached the wall and the city ultimately fell. The causeway he built remains to this day, having over time turned the island into a peninsula. At the age of 24, this military giant called Alexander the Great conquered the island fortress of Tyre. Alexander did what up till now no one could do. Alexander built an island to conquer the unconquerable city. The Lord Almighty has a day in store for all the proud and lofty, for all that is exalted, and they will be humbled. Isaiah 2:12. Alexander went on to create one of the largest empires in history, and he is widely regarded as the most successful military commanders of all time. But what's even more worth mentioning is Alexander himself suffered from the delusion that he was a god, the son of Zeus. But in 323, while in Babylon and at the age of only 32, and from a speculated period of heavy drinking and subsequent febrile illness, he died. So for the record, he wasn't a god either. See, history's great, and so is the word of God. The book of Ezekiel pronounces judgment on both Israel and the surrounding nations. The book also pronounces judgment on us today. If I had to describe ourselves, I would say that there are aspects of us that resemble the city of Tyre. We think we are self-sufficient because we are wealthy, intelligent, powerful, with the aim to acquire more wealth, more power. We think we should be rulers of our own lives and that we don't need to be accountable to anyone. When the snake deceived Eve, he disguised submission to himself under the trick or guise of personal autonomy. That is, he never once said to Eve, "I want to be your master." Remember what he said? Do you want to be your own master? He never asks us to become his servant. Just serve ourselves in the form of self-obsession, self-interest, selfness. I read that in the next decade we can expect to see the emergence of at least 5 trillionaires in the world. Trillionaires. Some could reach that, amount even sooner. I can't fathom the power they will wield. I suspect they will resemble the prince that we will talk about next week. Hosea says the danger of being affluent and comfortable opens us up to being prideful. When they were fed, they became satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud. As a result, they forgot me. I overstated the affluent part. Actually, we only need to have food and we forget. While the West is turning away from God, we see the third world countries are opening up to the gospel. They are the largest growing converts to Christianity. See, they're hungry. Tyre's pride is a pattern that runs through the whole Bible. In fact, it's more than a pattern, it's in our DNA. It is hardwired in every human, and it continues to run right up into our own hearts and minds as we live by our own definitions of good and evil. We too have an animal crouching at our door, the door of our heart. We have to learn to rule it, and we have to keep that door shut. So why are we studying this book that most people don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole? Why are we looking at Israel's history? Why are we looking at Tyre's history? Because we are a part of this story, and it will become more evident in the weeks to come. See, we were written in that covenant that God gave to Israel, where we too would be blessed. Then Jesus at Calvary ratified that covenant, and by his death took upon himself all the curse that the snake has caused, finally crushing his head. So God's plan for his children to live eternally in communion with him in the garden has not changed. Not one bit. It's just been repositioned. God bless you, church.